If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People who have seen cryptids or other unknown creatures, what is your story? I was almost taken by a grindilo. When I was little, like 5 or 6, we went to a park near our house that had a pond. I was always fascinated with the small creatures, water bugs, fish, algae, everything, so I was squatting down staring at this incredible little universe, completely enchanted with it all. Suddenly something green came out of the water, grabbed my little shoe and pulled. It happened in an instant. My foot slid forward into the water and I fell backwards onto my butt. It was back in the water with a tiny splash as fast as lightning. I blinked, then got up and ran to my mom saying, "Something grabbed my foot and tried to pull me in the water." My mother tried to console me saying my foot simply slipped on the muck, but I know the truth. So heads up to anyone who lives in Milwaukee. The pond in Cozy Park on 7th and Lincoln has a grindilo. I've seen 3 things in my life that I can't explain. First one I saw when I was 12. I lived in South Texas at the time, so I was very grounded in my belief that everything could be explained. While I was walking through the woods, I found a little shack. As any 12-year-old kid would, I went inside and looked out the window. All I could see was a boomerang-shaped blob thing with a wing on the bottom and top of the curve. It flew away at high speed after I saw it. Second thing that happened was when I was 16, I was walking around in the woods about 30 miles north of the shack. I was carrying a .38 special revolver my dad had given me. There was a deer that had very little fur, stood on 2 legs like a human, and had massive antlers, like probably 3 feet across, 2 feet tall, kind of massive. When I see the thing, it started to come at me. I pulled the revolver and shot. I hit the deer monster thing and it turned and ran. I tracked it for a while, but I never found the body. Final thing I've seen that cannot be explained. I was once again walking around in the woods, but I was more east of the deer monster sighting. I was carrying my 1911 that I had bought recently. All of a sudden I got to a clearing and I started to feel a sense of dread. As I walked further into the clearing, I start to cry for no reason other than the sense of dread and grief I was feeling. When I stopped to wipe my eyes, I looked up and I saw a bear. This is in South Texas and I knew for sure there was no bears in Texas, so I pull my gun just in case, and the bear screams at me like a girl, saying while screaming, "You should not be here, leave now." I still don't know what I was seeing, but I booked it out of there. My entire childhood, my father and I used to take late night walks due to his insomnia from shift work. Our neighborhood is considered very safe and ultimately was an urban neighborhood, besides one of the roads towards the back of the neighborhood being lined with thick forest for about a mile and about a quarter deep, which made a circle back in itself. All of these walks are very dear memories of mine except one, and it ended being the last one. Along the road with the tree line, there was a single street light to illuminate a small plot of land that someone owned but was very overgrown and ill-kept. It was very common for us to walk this road to enjoy the sounds of the forest, the lack of illumination, and the ease of circling back. One ordinary night, as we're walking and making conversation, my father abruptly stops, pulls me close, puts a hand over my mouth, crouches with me, and points towards the single illuminated plot roughly 100 yards away. At first, I didn't see anything and thought he was pulling my leg, but just as I began to protest his grasp, I see a very small humanoid figure, roughly 3 feet in height, scrawny, with long limbs, materialize out of the plot's brush line and cautiously take in its surroundings before signaling towards the brush. After a few seconds, 2 other small, humanoid figures materialize as well. After a brief moment of what looked to be a discussion, all 3 make a dash for the forest tree line. Once this happened, my father picked me up, threw me over his shoulder and made a break for our home, which was roughly a half-mile back. Mind you, my father is 6'5", 220 pounds, and I was roughly 120 pounds at this time, and he never showed signs of slowing due to his fear and adrenaline. After this night, we never took late night walks. He installed 4 bright motion detection lights around our acre plot, and brought home a dog. The few times I've tried bringing it up, he doesn't want to discuss and made it clear he never wanted to. Those figures still give me chills, and the image of the 3 huddled together is very vivid 15 years later. I didn't see anything, but I had a weird as duck experience out in the woods. I live near the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains. I hike up there pretty much from May to October. A few years ago, I decided to hike this pretty strenuous trail that leads to a huge rock slide. I park and notice I'm the only person there. I have 2 dogs. Get them out and start up the trail. About a mile in, I come to this clearing that has a huge teepee-like structure in it. The trees are all woven together. I put down my walking stick and stopped to take pictures. Seemed weird but cool. Here's some pics. In the last picture you can see that there's a sapling that is still alive that is bent nearly fully backwards that's woven in there. I moved up the trail after the pictures, and as soon as I walked past the tree structure, I immediately felt like I was being watched and the woods went silent. It was so ducking weird. No bugs, no birds, no small animal noises. Dead. Ducking. Silent. I hike by myself all the time. I don't get creeped out or really too scared. I've seen bears and I'm sure there are cougars out there. I keep going up and the feeling is getting way more intense. And my dogs are starting to act weird. These are experienced trail dogs. They don't really get weird like that, staying super close to me, not making a lot of noise. I realize that I left my walking stick down by the tree structure. Duck. Oh well, I don't want to go back down to get it and then back up. I got a 1/4 mic or so past the tree thing and the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I'm thinking, okay, rationally, it's probably a big cat. So I head back down. The rational part of my brain told me to slow down. My flight response? Nope. Full speed down a 30 to 40 degree slope. I get down to the tree structure and meadow and I look down and my walking stick is gone. Like it's nowhere to be seen. It was pretty distinct because it was made of aspen and I'd picked it up somewhere else. There are no aspen in this part of the forest. I'm ducking terrified. I kept running. I felt like I was being chased but I never saw anything. Never heard anything either. Yes, it could have been a big cat, but why did it only start after I passed the tree structure and how did my stick go missing? I was nearly to the parking lot before the feeling of being watched/chased left me. I will never ever go back there. Still thinking about it gives me the creeps. So, this happened to my son when he was 17 years old. We lived in New Mexico at the time. My son, Cody, was riding along with his friends Drew and Alex. They were in Drew's truck and Drew was driving. It was night and they were heading to Drew's house. Drew lived out in the country, so the road they were on was isolated and surrounded by desert. In fact, that whole area is flat and mostly dirt. As they're driving along, they see a man standing in the middle of the road. Drew slows down and they all expect the guy to move off to the side. The guy doesn't move. He just stands there. Drew slows to a stop. The guy is standing just outside the light from the headlights. He's wearing jeans and some sort of long sleeve shirt. They couldn't make out the features of the guy's face, but they could tell he was facing them. Nobody moves for a few seconds. The kids start to talk about going around him, but aren't sure if they should pass by this guy or turn around and go another way. Suddenly, the guy drops to all fours and starts running towards the truck. All the kids start screaming. Drew slams the truck into reverse and floors it. Now, they're going backwards on this dark country road and this guy is chasing them on all fours. And he's keeping up with the truck. Drew goes faster and finally the guy drops out of sight. Drew turns the truck around and they all came back to our house. I was in the living room when they came running in, slammed and locked the door, and went tearing up the stairs to Cody's room. I went up to see what was going on and this is when they told me the story. I've never seen them so pale and frightened. They were completely freaked out. This happened on a Friday night around 8 p.m. These were kids that normally would rather be anywhere except home on a weekend. That weekend they stayed at our place the whole time. They didn't go out at all and then only left because they had school on Monday. It took a month before they wanted to go out again at night. They would go anywhere during the day, but at night they usually gathered at our house. After a little research, they all agreed that it was a skinwalker. Even to this day if I bring up that night, Cody and his friends will get really quiet and look scared. It took a long time for them to get past it, and they still think that talking about it will make it come back. I was camping with some friends on a piece of privately owned land that bordered a national forest. We had our tent set up at the back of the fence/cleared part of their property. The large mesh window of my tent was facing out towards the forest. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling as if somebody was up and about. I was looking out the window and saw a dark from head to toe humanish shaped figure lean away from a tree and slowly lean back behind the tree. It kept doing it for a few minutes, as if it was checking out our camp. I woke my boyfriend up and told him I thought someone was out in the forest behind us. He looked but only saw a glimpse of a dark figure running off deeper into the woods. Nobody from our camp had been out of their tent, there were no neighbors anywhere close, and the closest campgrounds and hiking trails were also pretty far away. I was walking home one night at about 3 a.m. About a block from my house, down the road I saw an inhumanly tall figure in what appeared to be bright white cloth. I don't believe in ghosts and stuff. I made a comment about this and someone said it sounded like a Fresno nightcrawler. What bothers me though, is that if nightcrawlers are real, this one was easily almost 9 feet tall. Where most reports set them at no taller than 4 and one was at 6. It really didn't do anything besides walk across the lawns of the houses. By the time I got down the road, it was long gone. Though I did have the feeling I was being followed/watched the rest of the walk home. I love to tell this story of mine. Anyway, I was walking my dog and he started woofing and borking at the house across the street. I slowed down, trying so get a look at what he was seeing. There was this white grayish boomerang shaped thing, flapping its wings really slowly like a manta ray in the water, but it was moving way too fast, circling our neighbor's house. It zoomed around the house, disappearing into the backyard and going back around the front maybe 5 times as I stood, staring at whatever it was. It was nighttime, but there was enough light to see that it didn't have any definable features. It was just an amorphous, boomerang-shaped thing, and it was flying with one wing pointed towards the ground and one towards the sky, vertically. People say it was an owl or a bat or another type of bird, but it didn't have feathers, or defined edges, or eyes, or a head, or anything animalistic. It was just a diffuse, oblong, unnatural shape less than 100 feet away from me, moving way too fast for how slow its wings were flapping. And then it disappeared behind the house. To this day I'm not sure what I saw, or if I even truly saw it. The prospect of it being a vivid hallucination is almost as scary, but my dog saw it too. I swear on my mother's grave I saw something that night. A while back, I lived way out in the middle of nowhere in Oklahoma. Due to coyotes and other animals, I'd always go outside with a knife or machete. Well, one night I was taking out the trash. I was 11 or 12 at the time. The trash can was a good 50 feet from the house, surrounded by bushes and shrubs. Well, I put the trash in the can and went to head back when something reached from the shrubs and latched into my ankle. I figured I was caught on a branch or something, so I pulled my good harder. That's when I realized that those were fingers wrapped around my ankle, and that they were far too long to be human. I swung the machete at whatever was grabbing me, and I heard the most blood-curdling screech I've ever heard. I ran to the house. It was one of those shipping container-shaped trailers. The thing about those trailers is, you get a hole in the side panel and animals can get trapped under it. I heard it under the house that night. Sounded like a big dog or something. Never found out what it was, luckily. I was walking to meet up with my friend. I live in CT, so as far as I knew there was nothing here that could be a cryptic or unknown to us. While I was walking at around 11 p.m. go meet up with my friend to chill for a little. I approached this house, specifically the garage, because I cut through the yard. As I came closer to the garage, I noticed my friend. It was him. I did our call, which a CHH sound, and this thing just looked at me with his face. Every detail was the same, and it was a full moon that night, so I could see him very clearly. I got closer, called his name, and he gave no response. I just thought he was being freak and ducking with me, so I continued on my way and Snapchatted him asking what the hell he was doing. He shortly sent me a Snapchat picture of him at a bowling alley in a town about 30 minutes away. This was all within 5 to 10 minutes of the sighting. I never saw anything again, but from then on I wasn't much of a night person anymore. I still can't shake the eerie and dreadful feeling I had when I saw that thing. I tend to not talk about the subject because of how much it genuinely scares me. I still can't think of what the thing was, but it mocked the appearance of my friend. This experience has seriously freaked me out, and I still refuse to walk alone at night. My grandmother had a story from the late 50s driving north on a paved 2-lane road lined with small trees and brush with my great aunt and one of my uncles, Ron, who was about 2 years old at the time and was in the back seat. They rounded a turn while climbing a series of switchbacks up a hill. Now this is from memory because she passed away about 7 years ago now. I smelled it before we saw it. As they approached, it was standing beside the road, down a couple of feet in a ditch, but it was still taller than the car by a couple of feet. When her sister sees it, she grabs her by her arm and yells, "Look out, Barbara, it's a bear," and she replied, "That ain't no bear." It stood there and they passed it. It looked like a very large hairy man with hair all over its face, only its ears, lips and eyelids lacked hair. But what struck here as most interesting was that it had, or appeared to have had, no neck. Its head sat upon its shoulders in a strange way. While watching them, it turned its whole body and its hair was brown and matted like a stray dog. After they passed, she watched it in the rearview mirror. It stepped up out of the ditch on the side of the road, and in one large step it stepped all the way to the center line of the road, and in one more step it cleared the road into the ditch on the other side of the road, and within 3 steps it had cleared 20 feet into the brush and trees and disappeared from sight. This whole time she said her sister was holding her arm, crying and jabbering away like a mental patient, and that they had both pissed in their seats. Ron in the back seat slept through it. This isn't even remotely supernatural. At best, it's an unknown local species or a similar looking native species. But in northern New England, we don't have any black panthers. Yes, I know there's technically no such thing, just all black jaguars or leopards. Yet people somehow keep seeing them on occasion. And I've seen one just casually walking down the middle of the road, until it noticed my car approaching, at which point it ran off into the woods. Pretty underwhelming, I know, but I know my cats, and I have coon cats, Pretty big as a frame of reference, and my local big fauna, and this was close enough to my house that I wasn't confused by the background, and it was nothing normal. It was a frickin' huge black cat. Like the size of a Great Dane. No, I can't prove it. But it was there, and it was a giant black feline. I was with my dad on a motorcycle trip and stopped somewhere between Idaho and Washington at a rest stop. We were stretching our legs and I decided to walk a bit through the woods at the edge of the rest stop. I went a little farther than I originally planned and decided I should go back. That's when I noticed a really old car in the trees, like 1930s. My dad and I are car buffs, so I went back to tell him about it and we decided to go all the way back in so he could see it himself. It took forever to find it again, it was really far deep in the woods. We got close to it, closer than I originally had the first time, and we could tell something was wrong. The 4 doors had been ripped off and were laying in the dirt around the car, and the entire interior was filled with sticks, like a nest. It was totally filled with sticks, and they were held together with a mixture of mud and what smelled like poop. It smelled absolutely awful. It was also full of hair. We got the creepiest feeling and ran out of there as fast as we could. Never went back and I have no idea what would have made a nest like that inside a car. Backstory, I grew up in the mountains. My parents owned a large number of horses and would do pack trips out in the mountains. My job was to wrangle the horses in the morning. We let them out to graze in the evening. The horses wore cowbell to make them easier to find. Sometimes they would be hours away from camp. One morning the horses had wandered a considerable distance and I was having trouble finding them. I hiked into an area with old thick forest. I was beginning to get frustrated. I was unable to find them, and did not want to return to camp without the horses. In the distance I heard the bells. Perfect. I followed the sound to the edge of a winding creek. Then the bells stopped. Out of nowhere I heard the bells in a different direction, so I followed them. Maybe the water carried the sound? I could hear the bells while I was wandering through the woods and each time it would lead me to a different edge of the creek, deeper and deeper into the woods. And then they stopped. This happened 3 to 4 more times before I finally listened to my gut and got the hell out of there. The disturbing part was when I returned to camp the horses had wandered in on their own, a rare occurrence, and all had been accounted for. The Aboriginal trail hands told me they believed it was a mischievous spirit trying to lure me away until I was hopeless lost. I was in southeast Missouri at a friend's lake house. We rode an ATV with a small trailer down and around the lake to deal with some beavers or something blocking some drainage area. There were 4 of us. 2 rode on the ATV and myself and another buddy rode on the trailer. We walked from the parked ATV down to the edge of the lake. The 2 who rode on the ATV brought the rifle down a bit from where we walked. My friend and I were about 75 yards from the ATV when we saw something approach it from the nearby tree line. It was stark white, like an albino animal of sorts. It was about as big as the ATV. It had the general shape of a mountain lion, but it had a very fluffy tail, like a wolf or coyote. It sniffed around the ATV for about 10 seconds, stared at us, and sulked slowly back into the woods. I'm an avid outdoorsman, was an Eagle Scout, and have spent a lot of time in the woods, but I've never anything like it or since. I'd imagine an albino, mangy mountain lion that was in a relatively populated area. There was a general store/deli that was a 5 to 10 minute drive from the lake house. Someone would have heard about it. When I was around 10 to 12, I was up at my grandparents' camp in the Adirondacks for a weekend. I shared a room with my younger brother and I woke up one morning and looked out the bedroom window right behind the headrest. The camp was located right on the edge of the woods. It was pretty much up a trail that led to the edge of the deeper part of the woods, less inhabited by people, and probably 100 to 200 feet away were a group of turkeys wandering around the forest floor. I grew up going hunting with my dad, so I knew what turkeys looked like in the woods and what their size roughly was. However, right next to the turkeys, standing on a fallen tree, was what looked like a mix of a hawk and a turkey but with a humanoid shape. It was probably about 6 to 8 feet tall and looked to have a massive wingspan. Obviously all of my size estimates are based on a preteen me, however, it was right next to turkeys and I was very familiar with the size of turkeys. This was much larger and semi-humanoid. I never told anyone about it, kind of just woke up and went to eat breakfast, a little too stunned to process that what I just saw I actually saw. And I was definitely fully awake as I watched it for a few minutes, just watched the turkeys wander. Not sure what happened, but maybe some of you can give me some suggestions. When I was 14, I went into the woods as a dare because my cousins knew I was terrified of the woods. I walked for 30 minutes before realizing that something was wrong. I looked around and the woods were dead silent. I've heard that prey only go quiet when there are predators about. The second thing I noticed was that it was nighttime. This shook me because when I set off, it was sunset. Needless to say, I practically sprinted through the woods to get back to the cabin. When I returned, there was a cop car outside of the cabin. It was 8 o'clock. What I thought was 30 minutes turned out to be 4 hours. 3 a.m. with my buddy. Pulled up to a light. I was a repo man at the time and we were out looking for cars. True story. I look over at a late 90s/early 2000s Honda CR-V. My exact words. Holy shit, that chick has no face. Looked like No Face from the Dick Tracy movie in the early 90s. Like an egg. Creepiest part is I knew it was female. No idea how I knew, made a left and we went straight. That was it. Never talked about it again until a few years later. He thought he was asleep and dreamed it. One night while I was in college, I went for a de-stressing drive by the nearby lake. I'd circled around and was driving through the woods below the spillway. I was crossing over a small bridge when I saw a thing crossing the road. It looked like your stereotypical Bigfoot. It was probably 3/4 of the way across the road when I first saw it, and continued the rest of the way across to my left. As it stepped off the road, it passed behind a road sign, which was up to its mid-chest or shoulders. I went back the next day and got out of the car, that would have put it at around 9 tall. As I continued on, stunned, I drove a couple hundred feet when I saw a pair of deer darting across the road, away from where the thing had gone. I got the hell out of there. Just for a better understanding of my surroundings, I'm from Kentucky. Lots of wooded area and people love their guns, including me. I used to not believe that there was unknown stuff in the woods. I thought maybe Bigfoot, could be real, but I severely doubted it. After this happened, I know there is something unknown out there. I had just bought my first AR-15 style rifle, Ruger AR-556 for anyone who cares, and bought a 60-round drum magazine for it at Gander Mountain while they were going out of business because why the duck not? Reading up on the drum, I read they were amazing and rarely had any issues at all. This will important later. A few days after I got it, I finally decided to take it out for a test drive and sight in my gun a little better. Here's where everything went to shit. As I said above, Kentucky is super wooded. 3/4 of the land I lived on was just thick woods. There was a main path for driving our gator and few small paths our cows had made in the woods. I decided to walk along our creek that had a small path half cleared by our cows. At the end of the path is a big field our cows graze in and where I sight in guns when the cows aren't there. As soon as I crossed the fence to go to the field, I instantly felt like I was being watched, closely. I brushed it off because I've walked back there 1,000 times before and never been bothered by anything. So, I keep walking and ignore the feeling of being watched, but at the same time, I'm aware of the feeling. I know I feel like I'm being watched, but I wasn't giving it any noticeable attention. The walk to the field along the creek is a very short walk, maybe 2 minutes at a slow pace. The further I walked, the more intense the feeling got, like I was getting closer to whatever was watching me. About halfway there, the feeling got so intense, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The drum magazine I had with me was unloaded, so I stopped and started loading it. I only brought 20 rounds with me because I was just going to sight in my gun and 20 should have been plenty. So, now I'm stopped, paying extremely close attention to what's going on around me and loading my magazine. The exact moment I started putting rounds in the drum, I smelled something dead, like it had been dead for a while and rotting in the sun. I started looking around and right behind me was what was left of a possum. It was torn to pieces. It was almost like it was placed there for me to find. The only thing was it looked like it had been dead maybe a day at most, and what I was smelling seemed like it was far more decomposed. This obviously didn't set well with me, so I double-timed it on the magazine loading. I guess I should have taken the dead possum as a last chance to turn around. I decided to keep going. I had never had any problems back there before, so I assumed my brain was just being paranoid. I was almost to the field when I saw it. I was at the end of the creek and the feeling of being watched was unbearable. Just as I was near the end of the creek and the edge of the woods, I heard a splash in the water. Me being on edge, immediately turned toward the noise, gun ready but no round in the chamber. Walking down the creek away from me was something I will never forget. At least 8 feet tall, probably taller. Very skinny. Imagine a grown man that weighs 120 pounds. Now stretch him out to be 8 feet tall but his body width stays the same. Very long arms and it walked on 2 legs. Skin stretched tightly across its body. It made no noise, aside from the splash when it stepped in the creek, while it walked. It also had a very weird walk, almost like a waddle, but taking large steps. But that could have been because it was on a muddy creek bank. It was also a light brown color, almost like the color of a deer. That's all I can remember about it right now. I will edit it later if I remember anything else. Now I know why I felt like I was being watched. Magazine loaded, bolt ready to send a round in the chamber. Remember what I said about the magazine being extremely reliable? I press the bolt release on the gun to chamber a round just in case this monstrous thing decides to attack. I did not intend on striking first. The round gets stuck somehow and doesn't even budge out of the magazine. I had never used that magazine before, so it didn't fail from heavy use. A bolt closing from a gun has enough force to break your finger, so why didn't this magazine work? My only guess is that thing had something to do with it. The magazine never worked right again and I had to return it to Magpul. Needless to say, I didn't tell them this happened, I just told them the magazine failed several times. Anyway, back to the thing. Gun jammed on the first round, which is usually the easiest. The thing books it out of there without running or making a noise. I had just long enough exposure to it to get the details I provided about it. Now, for assumptions. It happened about late May last year. I still have the emails from Magpul regarding the drum, so I'm using those as reference because after this, I needed something reliable. As for what the creature was, me and a friend who knows more about this stuff than I do have decided it could have been a ducking wendigo. The reason we think wendigo is because everything I described matches them near perfectly. I had read that they are incredibly thin and tall, have a stench of death that follows them everywhere, explains the smell at the possum, very fast, can be several colors, light brown included, and that they sometimes violently kill other animals to scare humans, again, the possum. The only thing that we couldn't come up with is its behavior. Why am I still alive? Wendigos are supposed to be incredibly aggressive. Aside from watching me, it did nothing. Didn't try to attack or confront me, it ran from me like it was scared or trying to draw me where it wanted me. This being said, I have never had another encounter with it. I have gone to the same field taking the same path expecting to be watched and have not gotten that feeling of being watched as strongly as that day. Something was out there and you can't convince me otherwise. I've tried to trick myself into thinking I'm being watched out there and it still had no comparison between that day. Less a cryptid than something that didn't belong where it was at the time. Back in college in the late 1980s I used to work as a park ranger on the graveyard shift at a state park on the ocean in southeastern Connecticut. During much of the summer there would be people camping in the park, but when September came, and the nights started getting colder, I was often there completely by myself. One night I was making a last patrol through the park around 2:30 a.m. and as I rounded a corner the headlights of my truck lit up a hedgerow and, just for a second, I saw the ass end of a coyote disappear into the bushes. It's unremarkable now, but in 1988 nobody believed me. LOL coyote. Not Bigfoot? Duck you read the night report damn it. My boss told me I was crazy. They were known to exist in small numbers in the hills in the northwest corner of the state by then, but the idea that they were lurking in the southeast was clearly preposterous. But within 10 years or so after that they became a thing in that area and you'd have to watch small dogs when taking them out at night. Then black bears, moose, and even a very rogue mountain lion showed up down there. That one coyote was there in '88 though. I was solo backpacking in an area I'm extremely familiar with to test some new gear before a more serious backpacking trip. It was about 5 p.m. and I was at around 7,000 plus foot in the Sierra Nevada mountains outside of Tahoe on a ridge with a very breathtaking and interesting outcropping. The stone was very geometric and when you knocked on it it rang like a hollow storage tank. I kept some pieces of the rock because I found them interesting. As in putting the rocks I picked into my backpack for the hike down to a spot I had selected earlier for camp I hear a fluttering noise not unlike a pigeon landing. I turn my head quickly but without much thought to see the bird and what I see instead is a praying mantis. This mantis was at least 5 feet long. It stood very erect and its abdomen was curved to a very extreme angle allowing it to stand roughly chest height to me, 6 feet. I was couched down so the thing was eye level. It grabbed a piece of food I had been eating and stared at me as it ate it, then its wings popped out and it flew off. I felt very nauseous and had a very bad migraine afterwards, which isn't strange as I suffer from cluster headaches. I chalk it up to dehydration and a migraine but the memory is so real. I have a story but it's about something I heard that scared the shit out of me. I was on a student exchange program to the US, specifically New Mexico. I'm not from the US BTW. And near the end of my stay my host family, the dad, mom, me and their 2 daughters decided to go camping. When it was getting dark 16-year-old me and the 2 daughters decided to go climb a tree a bit away from the campsite, and when we reached the top of a tree we stopped dead in our tracks because of a sound I'll never forget. The youngest daughter, who was 14, was calling my name, which is a typical Dutch name, so not something some New Mexico local would just shout since they have trouble pronouncing it. The thing was this girl was sitting just below me not saying a word. We sat there as this thing, whatever it was, kept shouting my name in her voice for what felt like an eternity but was actually just 5 minutes. And when it stopped, we bolted back to campsite where the mom and dad were sitting just enjoying the evening. But when we told them, the dad's face became pale as a ghost and immediately told us to grab our things because we were leaving, and 5 minutes later we were gone. To this day I still have no idea WTF that was, and the dad never wanted to talk about it. I am an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar and used to wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was a cryptid called a dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear cannot move how it did, and it was not a normal wolf, as they can't comfortably run on 2 legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural at doing. I can elaborate further if you wish. This happened around June or July of 2007, I believe. I was around 17 years old and more cocky then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in NW, Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in the cabin, or at least by the bonfire by the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy, that is until this incident. So this happened somewhere between 1200 to 1400. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo, he was not. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me. When I decided to mess with him, I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet, and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds, but it wasn't normal. This wolf was on 2 legs, crouching next to a tree with its arm grasping the tree, grasping with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin that we have to go, and next thing I know he is sprinting, and I look back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran when it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all fours. It charged us and sounded right on our asses, barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 tall when upright, and that where it should have had front paws it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more waddle on 2 legs. The closest description is silly, a werewolf or dogman. I was out fishing with my brothers and cousins. Our uncle and a few of his buddies rented a boat for the day. It was fairly normal as far as fishing trips go, but when it was at that twilight stage, sun is still up but everything is a dark orange hue, we started heading back towards town, when something swam under us. It had to have been pretty huge to rock us around like that. I didn't get a good look, but I swear it was a giant goddamn fish, like whale size huge. Might be exaggerating a bit. The fact remains something has always been out there. My grandparents used to tell stories about our ancestors and the creature in the lake, none of them scary. It seems to want to be left alone. Oh, do I have a good one? I live in suburban Illinois and I never had any weird experience until about 10 years ago. I have a forest preserve outside my house that's pretty huge. One day, while I was looking out my window, I saw a huge black cat with a long curly tail. It looked to be at least 7 feet long and it was prowling low to the ground. I went back to try to tell my mom about it, and unfortunately the cat was no longer there. I thought I was just imagining things until about last year when I read an article in the Chicago Tribune about mythical beasts seen in Illinois, and one of them was giant black panthers. I literally have never freaked out more than when I read that article. I live in New Mexico, but this wasn't your white UFO in the sky or just another drunk guy walking home. I go for walks a lot, helps me think about stuff and overall just feels nice. When my dad took us to these cabins with his friends, I went for a walk on the trail. The trail begins after a thin metal bridge, and I'm not making this up either. It goes over the river, and goes off into the woods on a trail that loops around. Getting lost on this road wasn't an issue even at night. There are these lights up along the road so you don't wander off it. The sun was setting, and even with hardly any light in the sky the trees made it almost dark and I was already coming back. I like to look out in the woods white walking because it looks wonderful really, but when I looked over to the left I saw something from the corner of my right. I catch something moving. I look over and it's still there. It looks like a large dog, no hair, and it moved as if its legs are damaged and it just waddled around away from the trail. Lucky for me it wasn't heading in my direction. My heart raced because I legit couldn't think of an animal that moved like this at all. I picture it as a Newfoundland breed, no hair, weirdly bent legs, and its mouth was wide open with small teeth. I still have zero idea of what to call this thing because it looked so out of place, and it obviously didn't want anything to do with me and seemed to be sort of oblivious to its surroundings because its legs would knock on trees as if it was nearsighted or something. Lived in a dorm that was haunted AF. Not only me and my friends, but other random strangers have told me they've had experiences with this ghost. My friend had the worst of it TBH. I won't speak for her, but I share my experiences. I lived in the building 2 years, and worked at the front desk. Our building was open during breaks and I worked over winter break a lot because I really needed the money / couldn't stand being in my parents' house the entire break. My first encounter with the ghost was during said break when he would make the elevators randomly open and close while I was working. They were right next to the desk. Next encounter was over spring break that year when I would hear the sound of the whiteboard markers being shuffled around in their box, but there was no one there. No big deal, whatever, Hess probably just lonely. One night I was at my desk and I heard my door shaking. It was weird, but I was like, whatever, it's probably the vent, except there was an vent, never my door. I just brushed it off as whatever, so I went to bed, headboard next to said shaking door. It kept happening for a while and I jokingly was like, hey Mr. Ghost, I'm trying to sleep, can you not? And then it completely stopped. The second year I lived there he got a little more intense. He'd throw my backpack off my bed all the time and knock things off my desk. Never anything breakable, but something to get my attention. One night I remember waking up in the middle of the night for some reason to see a man's face next to me on my pillow and staring at me. Something about the face wasn't quite right though, I can't remember. Also, since I'm not a pleasant person to wake up, I stared into its eyes and said, can we not? I'm really ducking tired and rolled over and went back to sleep. Apparently when I've just been woken up I'm not scared of anything. One night I was driving through North Florida on my way down to my parents' winter home with a friend. We were in some backwoods desolate area on SR 19 and you could only see in front of you as far as your headlights would go. Past that it was pitch dark. We were even joking with one another that if the road and everything else just dropped off there, we wouldn't have been able to see it when suddenly, we both watched this huge, black, cat-like creature slink across the highway. It was just beyond the reach of my headlights, like you could barely see it, but as we got closer you could make it out just a little and see the reflective eyes. I know there are panthers in Florida, but they're tan and I doubt they're as big as this was. My friend and I were both like, what the duck was that? Basically at the same time after it crossed the road. We were in our late teens and both of us are adventurous type of people who aren't very easily scared, but this thing was ducking creepy and it freaked me out. I still have no idea what it was. I was hunting squirrels one day after school in rural Miz. I was about 10 years old. I heard some calling out to one another and as the sun set, I tracked them to a grove of pines. I was in a hurry, so rather than work my way around the tree line, I came straight across a field towards them because the sun was setting. About midway across the field, a panther cried out from that grove of pines. It was that woman cry wild thing that shut down my legs. I literally fell to the ground in fear, clutching my gun like it was useless and important at the same time. I laid there for a while with my heart pounding, trying to make out movement ahead of me. Then behind me. Probably even looked up, I was so spooked. I worked my way down a base row and crossed a fence to the main road and walked home from there, about half a mile more down a dirt road. I did not fill my pants. But it was the second most frightened I've been in the wild. In my mid-30s, I was fishing in Titusville, FL, north of the main bridge. In my 17-foot Mohawk canoe with a trolling motor, I felt like I could face anything, go anywhere. What I did not reckon is that I'd roll up on a pod of sleeping manatees. I didn't know they were there and had no idea what they would do if spooked. What they do is a beaver-like behavior, slapping their tails on the surface of the water. Except they ranged from 3 to 800 pounds and were 20 of them, according to the ranger I spoke to about it. This tail slap behavior caused my canoe to launch about 6 feet in the air in the front, no weight, and probably just a few inches off the water in the rear, with 150 pounds me and a small trolling motor and 30 pounds battery. All my equipment flew into the air. I even saw a good-sized croaker, a bait fish, launched into the air over where I was, who almost landed in my boat when he came down. I sat there in silence as the pod pulsed away, hardly making a ripple. For several minutes I was disoriented and had no idea what had happened. I made my way to shore, on the NASA Fuel Railway if you know the area, and almost threw up, I was so freaked out. For all I knew, for several minutes, it was Nessie and her children who had launched me into the air. I was sleeping over at my cousin's house one night about 15 years ago. The house is almost 150 years old now. I woke up in the middle of the night to see a man in a black suit staring at my sleeping cousin and I from the doorway. I could have sworn it was a ghost, but I decided the next morning that it was probably just my imagination. 12 years later, I was at a party with my cousin and great aunt, cousin's father's aunt, and we got onto the topic of the supernatural. My cousin started telling the story of a man in a suit who would visit her bedroom late every night and talk to her from the doorway. At this point I start to nope out. Suddenly, my great aunt tells us that she grew up in that house also and had the exact same experience. After some research, we discovered that the house had been in our family for generations, and it is likely that we were seeing the spirit of our great-great-grandfather. The house's fireplace used to be in my cousin's bedroom doorway, and he would stand by the fire late at night. Ghost story incoming. To preface, I never believed in ghosts until this happened. When I was a missionary in Chile some years ago, I lived in a small town called Michaela in a little house with a few other sister missionaries. The house seemed like it had started small, like one room small, in maybe the 50s, and been added to as the years went on. A hall here, a bathroom with plumbing there. The weird thing about this house was that at around 3 a.m., every single night, the air would change. It felt like something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. The only way I've been able to verbalize it is spiritual nausea, like severe motion sickness, but not in my body, rather in my heart. Then we would hear child's running footsteps and laughter in the hall. None of us dared to leave our rooms in the wee hours of the morning, because once you open the door to the hall, that nauseous feeling multiplied tenfold. I would have chalked it up to stress dreams, but everyone experienced the same things. We thought it might be our imaginations, so we decided not to tell the next group of missionaries about La Niña. They asked about it anyway after being awakened by her laughter. Other weird things happened at night too. One missionary felt thin disembodied hands touching her back. I experienced sleep paralysis and saw a tall antlered figure staring at me in bed. Children's toys appeared in the hall. Some of our neighbors told us there was a nearby witch who didn't like us, and we occasionally found dead animals in the yard. Whether it was her doing or a carbon monoxide problem or an actual haunting, I have no idea. But it was distracting us from sleep enough to make us useless during the day. House blessings and prayers did nothing. Eventually we were authorized to change apartments and the event stopped. I don't think whatever it was meant any real harm. But I do think it desperately wanted to be noticed.